Here we're going to do a force diagram for a block or a box on an incline. And usually drawing these force diagrams is the first step in applying Newton's second law, which says that the sum of forces on an object, all added up, equals its mass times acceleration. And so having a good clear picture of those forces is necessary to apply this equation. So we'll take a look at three cases, and we'll see that the main difference between them is how the friction is behaving and what type of friction it is. So our first case is the box is just sitting on an incline. And here I'll draw the box as a point mass, and I will show the two components that you're interested in are along the incline and perpendicular to that. So the main forces, of course, are the mg, which makes an angle of 33 degrees to the vertical, and then the normal, which goes perpendicular to the plane. Now, because that box isn't moving, it must have a friction force holding it in place. And we typically call that static friction. And what that static friction is doing is it's canceling the component of the weight along the incline. And that component is mg sine of 33 degrees. Using some trig. The normal component, the Fn, is actually canceling the component of weight into the incline. So that is mg cosine of 33 degrees. And we usually have a condition on static friction that's a little bit awkward. That static friction is kind of like glue that holds up to a certain maximum. And we represent that and say that Fs is less than or equal to some coefficient times F normal. So there's a maximum amount allowed, but that friction can take on any value it wants to hold that box in place. Now, if the box is sliding down the incline, our diagram looks pretty much the same. So we have our weight. Let's get the inclination correct. So we have our weight making a 33 degree angle. And we have a normal force going up perpendicular from the incline. And we have friction acting backwards. But in this case, it is kinetic friction, or sliding, sometimes called Fk, so not to confuse it with static friction. So in the first diagram, S represents static. Our second diagram, K, represents kinetic. Now our weight and our normal force are still the same thing. So we still have Fk equals mg sine of 33. And we still have our normal force equal to mg cosine 33. But what is true about the kinetic friction is it can only take on one single value. Fk is equal to mu k times Fn. And I see I put a wrong symbol in my previous drawing. That should have been mu sub s for coefficient of static friction, whereas mu sub k is coefficient of kinetic friction. Yeah, and typically they are different. So static friction, the coefficient is usually a little bit larger than the kinetic friction. So now one more drawing, and there's not going to be too much new in this, except for the direction of the kinetic friction. mg will still point downwards. Fn will still point upwards. But our kinetic friction is now going to point down the incline, because, and everything else stays the same, the magnitudes are the same. And what will change between these two pictures is not the equations, but the acceleration up the incline will be different. Acceleration is different when sliding up versus sliding down. And if you have enough friction in the surface, you can actually do an experiment to determine this. You can time an object sliding up an incline versus sliding down. And this may be a measurable difference.